You know, sometimes life throws you the kind of curveball you could never see coming. I want to tell you a story about love, loyalty, heartbreak, and eventually healing. For over 20 years, I was married to a man I thought was my forever. We built a home together, raised two beautiful children, and shared a life that, to the outside world, looked steady, solid, even enviable. But everything changed when he fell ill. And then, everything shattered when he got better. Because after I stood by his side, after I nursed him back to health, he left me. When I look back on the beginning of our marriage, I remember warmth, laughter, that feeling of being chosen. We met in our late 20s, two ordinary people who thought love would conquer all. And in many ways, it did, at least for a time. Our life together wasn't extravagant. We didn't live in luxury or take trips around the world. But we had something I thought was even better, a partnership. We shared chores, raised our kids as a team, and celebrated birthdays and anniversaries with silly little traditions only we understood. He'd always make me tea in the morning, even if he was rushing, and every Sunday we'd cook breakfast together while the kids watched cartoons. Those moments felt like the glue that held us. I thought we were happy, I really did. Looking back now, maybe I was too comfortable. Maybe I assumed love was unshakable just because we had years behind us. But then he got sick. It started slowly. At first, just fatigue. A cough here, a day off there. But then came the diagnosis. I won't go into the exact illness. What matters is that it was serious. Serious enough that life suddenly revolved around hospital visits, test results, and long nights of worry. I remember watching him lie in that hospital bed looking smaller, weaker than I'd ever seen him. My husband, the man who once lifted our children onto his shoulders with ease, looked so fragile. And I thought, I can't lose him. Not now, not ever. So I stepped up. Like any wife would, right? I became his nurse, his advocate, his anchor. I managed his medications, cooked meals that aligned with his treatment, kept the house running, made sure the kids felt safe, and still tried to work enough to keep everything afloat. There were nights I'd lie awake, crying quietly so he wouldn't hear, because I was terrified and exhausted. But most of all, I was determined. I told myself, we'll get through this together. And we did. He recovered. But what I didn't know was that I was nursing a man back to health who would eventually walk away from me. It wasn't immediate. At first, things seemed almost normal again. He went back to work. The kids were relieved. And I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd find our rhythm again. But something was different. He was different. He was distant, quieter. And when I'd ask what was wrong, he'd brush it off. Nothing, I'm fine. Weeks turned into months, and then, one evening, he sat me down at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and shared family dinners. And he said words I'll never forget. I don't think I'm happy anymore. At first, I thought he meant with life, with work, with the after effects of illness. But no, he meant with me. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of loyalty, of building a family, of standing by him in sickness and health, and he said he wasn't happy. And then, the final blow, he told me he'd met someone else, someone who apparently made him feel alive again. Alive. That word cut deeper than a knife, because hadn't I just fought, we just fought to keep him alive? The hardest part wasn't even losing him. It was watching the devastation on our children's faces. They were teenagers by then, old enough to understand, but not old enough to process the betrayal. To them, their father was supposed to be the protector, the role model. And suddenly he was the one causing the pain. I did my best to shield them. I told them, we're going to be okay, but behind closed doors I was breaking. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I replayed everything in my head, asking myself what I did wrong, where I failed. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about me failing. It was about him choosing himself, choosing someone else. Still, the guilt haunted me. I worried my children would resent me for not keeping the family together. I worried I'd never feel whole again. I'll be honest, I felt ashamed. Ashamed that after 20 years, my marriage ended this way. Ashamed that I had given everything, my love, my time, my care, and it wasn't enough. Friends tried to comfort me. They said things like, "You're better off without him," or "This will make you stronger." But at the time, it didn't feel that way. At the time, it felt like I was walking around with a hole in my chest. And the worst part, the guilt. Because I couldn't stop thinking, if I hadn't pushed him so much during recovery, would he have stayed? If I'd been more exciting, more adventurous, less tired, less stressed, would he have chosen me instead? But those thoughts, those cruel little whispers, are lies. And it's taken me years to finally see that. Now here I am, early 50s, a single woman after 20 years of marriage. At first, that sentence felt like a failure. But now, it feels like freedom. I won't pretend it was easy. Rebuilding yourself never is. But piece by piece, I've started to put myself back together. I focused on my children, reminding them that they are loved, unconditionally, no matter what. And in many ways, they became my strength. I rediscovered old hobbies, painting, gardening, even traveling on my own, things I'd forgotten about while being someone's wife, someone's caretaker. I also learned something important, that self-worth doesn't come from being chosen by someone else. It comes from choosing yourself. I won't lie. There are still moments of sadness, days when I see couples holding hands and wonder why my story couldn't have ended differently. But there are also days of peace. Days where I wake up, make my own cup of tea, and smile at the quiet strength I never knew I had. I've learned to let go of the shame, to accept that sometimes love changes and sometimes people make choices we can't control. And most importantly, I've learned that endings aren't always tragedies. Sometimes they're beginnings in disguise. If you're listening to this and you've been through betrayal or heartbreak or the collapse of a marriage you thought would last forever, please hear me. You are not broken, you are not unworthy, and you are not alone. Sometimes the person we thought we'd spend forever with leaves. And yes, it hurts like nothing else. But their choice doesn't define your value. I nursed my husband back to health and he left me, but I didn't lose myself. And neither will you.